Prof Madiba, I think we can go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Constitutional Insights webinar, co-hosted by Daily Maverick and the Inclusive Society Institute. With me here, I just want to briefly introduce my other colleagues who are in the panel. The first one is Professor William Gumede, who is an associate professor of public and development management at the University of the Witwatersrand and professor of management at Stellenbosch University. A multiple award-winning, #1 best-selling author, is also the founder and executive chairperson of the Democracy Work Foundation. His work has been central to shaping South African government structures, having modeled key institutions like the Parliamentary Budget Office and the National Treasury Infrastructure Project Preparation Fund. He has designed and led critical programs that I think there are so many in numbers. I won't be able to list them. But again, it's also well internationally recognized. I think many of you have seen Professor Gumede doing a lot of interviews. So thank you very much, Professor Gumede, for joining this panel today. Then the second one is Dr. Robyn Tyler, who is a senior lecturer in the Center of Multilingualism and Diversity Research. She supervises graduate students there and all other teaching research work that she does. Her research, which I think is very critical for this webinar, it's on teaching focusing on multilingual learning, translanguaging, school language policy, biliteracy, bilingual learning materials development, language across the curriculum, and research methodology. She leads an RF-funded bilingual learning materials project, which I think is finishing in 2026, which is they're trialing bilingual learning materials into Cape Town primary schools. So I think with all these backgrounds that she brings to this discussion, I think that would be very, very useful. So welcome, colleagues, and I hope we are going to have a very interesting discussions. So I think to the audience, it is really our great honor to dedicate today's session to the profound legacy of Justice Albie Sachs, true champion of multilingualism and human rights in South Africa. We extend our deepest gratitude to the organizers for convening this important discussion in his name. Justice Sachs has long been a formidable supporter of mother tongue rights as a cornerstone of our constitutional democracy. His commitment was not merely theoretical, it was etched into his jurisprudence. A prime example, I think some of you will remember this case, it's a prime example that is the example is the case of Matukane and others versus Lair School prosecutor's arrest case, where his family defended the right to receive education in one's chosen language, highlighting the deep connection between language, identity, and dignity. Ours, colleagues, is a multilingual nation, home to over 25 languages, although we only recognize 12, including sign languages. But we've got many, many other languages in this country. While some may see this diversity of languages as a challenge, there is a growing consensus that this linguistic diversity is a resource than really a problem. So perhaps the most critical question in education, which of course we will be trying to address today, is how do we harness this resource to promote teaching and learning in our schooling education? We know there are many, many other challenges that we are facing, but how do we draw on from this? Of course, drawing on the concept of mother tongue. I'm very much aware that the term mother tongue itself, is subject of much debate, and maybe some of them will be able to touch on them today here. So I think that, from this webinar, there will be many other questions that our audience, you might be having. We want to encourage you to forward your questions, forward your question, then we will be able to address them. But to my panel, there are quite a number of of course, a few questions that I will ask them, but then we'll also take the questions from the audience. So maybe to you, let me just start by asking each of you, just to make an input, I mean, on what is your thinking, what comes to your mind, you know, when we talk about mother tongue education and its application in schools. Maybe just briefly, then we can take other questions. Can I start with Professor William Gumede? I know you can make your input on that, and then we'll come to Dr. Tyler.
Okay, thank you, Prof, and again, thank you to the organizers and also to the listeners, you know, the attendees. Just to start off from my side is, you know, multilingualism is a key part of our constitutional dispensation. It's a core part of our democracy. It's a core right, but it's also an exciting part of our country. You know, one of the world's most diverse societies. It's a really, you know, much more exciting, and we have to look at it as an opportunity. Now, for me, the big question is, if one look around the world, how can we promote multilingualism or mother tongue? Or before I get to that, maybe just to say, you know, some of the research, UNESCO research, have shown that it does help to learn during the early years, to learn in one's own language. It's absolutely do help, and it is very important. On the one hand, from an educational point of view, from the other hand, is from identity and from a cultural point of view, and you know, from a dignity point of view. I mean, and so on. But the challenge in multilingual countries is how do you do this, one, practically, and also there's a context that you know, the big global, you know, English is a big global language. In countries, I mean, countries have taken different approaches, and maybe, you know, where we can learn from. For example, if you take Singapore, some of the countries have done very well. Countries that are very diverse, many languages. From Singapore, what they've done is they've done where you do one language, but it's compulsory to do your mother language also early on. So you know, very pragmatic approaches to do it. In India, there's also you know, multilingual society. I mean, English has dominated, but they've tried the last couple of years to experiment to bring in mother tongue education early on. In these sort of multilingual societies, I mean, it's practically not always, you know, from a financial point of view, it's not so easy. So that's, for me, is that we have to look at the countries that are multilingual and that have done very well economically, and how did they manage it? So that's the one part. And the last part for me is in terms of what actually is the problem with our education system. Yes, it's a language issue, or are there other issues? Is the quality of teaching? Is the quality of our content? Do we read? Don't it be enough reading? Are we focusing on the right subjects for this economy, for the global economy, and so on? So we have to have the discussion in a much more holistic context, and for me that would be the key.
No, thanks so much, Professor Gumede. I think you've opened up different areas that we need to follow up as we go with our discussion. Dr. Tyler, I mean, briefly, what you have in mind? I mean, something that you can say, you know, this topic really touches you. Yeah.
No, thank you, Prof Madiba.
Yeah.
And from my side also, good afternoon to our audience, as well as my panelist, Prof Gumede, and yourself, and then to the organizers. This is a very interesting and really timely topic, which I think is shown by our big audience this afternoon. I think just two important points for me to really make at the start is, you did mention that mother tongue education people have got different views on it, Prof Madiba. And, you know, it's interesting that we have this topic coming up about mother tongue education, which if we are asking ourselves mother tongue education for who, because white English and Afrikaans speakers in South Africa, there's never a question whether they should have mother tongue education or not. So when we say mother tongue education, we're talking about Black African language speakers in this country. And so it becomes then a question, should we have mother tongue or not? But for white children, it's never a question. Right from the day they're born until the university, they have the luxury and the privilege of mother tongue education. And without some form of mother tongue education, learning is just not possible. And I think Prof Gumede did speak about other countries that we know. And the reality is that every country in the world is multilingual, and countries who do not have English as the dominant language in their country or the home language have some form of multilingual education because of the power of English in the world. So a country such as Germany or France, of course, the children are taught in the language that they understand the best, but they are also taught English. And so when we're talking about mother tongue education for South Africa, we really need to shift into a conversation about bi and multilingual education. The home language of all our children, whether that is Sepedi or English, needs to be foregrounded, but every child also needs a strong education system in English. And so, I mean, that's why at the moment our very recent policy shift in the DBE towards mother tongue-based bilingual education is so important, because that's the side, and I hope today we can really highlight bi and multilingual education.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Dr. Tyler. I think maybe I could just start with the question that has come in here. I've mentioned in my introduction that there are different understandings, different interpretation of what mother tongue education means. And one of the audience, I think Karin Swart, is asking us, saying, does mother tongue education mean teaching all subjects in the mother tongue, or teaching the mother tongue as a subject? So I think there is this kind of confusion. What does really mother tongue imply? If we say mother tongue education, does that mean really we teach all children through their mother tongue, or that means that we are offering that language, if it's Zulu, as a subject? So I think just that kind of, maybe Dr. Tyler there, you work with these things, so you can give us a bit of explanation.
No, thank you, Prof Madiba. So in terms of our policies that Prof Gumede mentioned, in 1997, during the transition, we had a very progressive, internationally well-known language and education policy, which allowed for both learners to learn in their home language as well as another language, so bilingual education as a medium of instruction for all subjects. But also what was stipulated was that learners should become multilingual through learning languages as a subject. And what we've found is that the implementation of that language and education policy has favored language as a subject. So we see, particularly in our elite or ex-Model C schools, African languages have been featured as subjects, usually with very little time and resources attached to them. And also for the majority of our children who are African language speakers, they study their home language as a subject all the way to matric, but that the official language of learning and teaching is English from grade 4, as early as grade 4, which we know from international research is far too early to switch into a foreign language. And in reality, what we know as well is that our classrooms are bi and multilingual. The teachers and the learners work with more than one language every day, but they do this orally, and it's very illicit. So teachers will never admit to doing this when the department officials come in, and it's done undercover. But this is what's happening. In order to make learning possible, it wouldn't be possible otherwise. But the difficulty comes in when our children from grade 4 have to write their exams and all their learning and teaching resources are in English only. And this has a huge contribution to our failure of our education system for our children.
Yeah, no, thank Dr. Tyler. I think if I can just add a comment there, especially on the switch from mother tongue to English, which normally happens in grade 4, I think over 78% of our learners now they still switch from home language to or mother tongue to English, 78%, which is quite huge. And maybe we might come to some of the consequences that comes from there. But I want to pose a question to Professor Gumede. You know, I mean, Dr. Tyler has mentioned the issue of the Constitution. You know, we really have enabling policy framework. Our Constitution is hailed as one of the most democratic constitutions, especially when it comes to language, recognizing 12 official languages, including sign language now. And again, as Dr. Tyler has indicated, 1997, we promulgated the language in education policy, which also is enabling because it allows teachers to be able to use more than one language in teaching and learning. But, you know, the question that I want to ask you is that now the implementation of these policies have lagged behind. You have mentioned good examples of Wales, you know, where Welsh, yes, speaks spoken, but there's Singapore, you know, Japan, if I can give an example. You know, how these other countries have really make use of their home languages in terms of teaching and learning. So, I mean, in your view, what is the single greatest political or bureaucratic barriers? What are the barriers in our country? You know, I've spent over 30 years working on language policy. At first, I was very much optimistic, but if you can ask me, I'm no longer optimistic like I was in 1994 when we transitioned. Now, the question is now, what is it that is holding us as a country? You know, what is it that, I mean, Dr. Tyler has mentioned that African-speaking learners and English-speaking learners seem to be already still getting what we can regard as mother tongue, you know, although there's a shift with the Africans. But the majority of the African learners are taught through a foreign language. You know, Neville Alexander used to say, it's only children of the slaves who learn through a foreign medium. So what is it that, I mean, from your broader context, broader understanding of things, what is it that is holding us as a country from implementing things that are so clear and that are so fair?
You know, the good thing is we've got a very good constitution, but sadly, it ends there because it is capacity, political will, state capacity to implement, and then not only state capacity, but I think political will is absolutely critical. And that has been a missing. So it's not just in the education department, but it's in all other, not in the language, but in every other part of the state, lack of state capacity. You know, once you don't have competence to run the state, if you can have all of the great policies in the world, can have a good constitution, but you know, if the state's apparatus, including the education apparatus, if it's not a competent, if it's not honest, if it doesn't have if political will and a good organizational culture is not there, it's not going to be implemented. I think we lost a really big opportunity in 1994 to use our multilingual society to great effect. So what we should have done and is to say, well, every person, every child that goes to school also take on an additional language that becomes crucial. So essentially what we do is, you know, there's English, but early on you do your home language and you do another additional language. Yes, there's a big burden on that. I mean, if you have multiple languages, but the thing is about taking multiple languages, rather than looking at a burden of it, we have to look at opportunities of it, opportunities of creating a nation, you know, identity, and so on. So if an Afrikaans-speaking person learns another language, and so on, and a mother tongue in the African languages, in the first phase of his or her life, get educated through his or her language, it becomes very, very important for a national project, for non-racialism and for national identity, because one can't build a common South Africanness without South Africans also having extra learning other languages as almost compulsory at the early phase of schooling. And then at the same time, you know, it's a balance. At the same time, then also allowing the marginalized African languages to be learned by those who speak it early on. I mean, we can debate where do we phase it out and bring in learning about the language. I mean, because there's two things here. It's first learning in your own language. Then the next one is phasing it out and then learning about a marginalized language. Now, from a social justice point of view, and from also from a reparations point of view, and it is very important to recognize African languages that have been marginalized before. I mean, that is very, very important in part of creating a common South Africanness. And that is why it is so important. It's not only for educational purposes, but also for nation building purposes, to recognize formally languages that's been marginalized. Now, how do you recognize this? Yes, you can have it there as official language.
I think, Prof, you are breaking a bit. You are breaking a bit. I don't know why. Yeah, maybe there's something. Or is it mine?
Prof Madiba, maybe I can come in while the connection gets better.
Where children get educated in it, and others learn the language.
Okay, let me just pick up there while we just catch up with the connection. But I think your question around the barriers to implementing what has been proven by research to be the right way to go, I think is such a good question. And what we need to remember in this is our beliefs about language. What we understand, the way we think about different languages. So Prof Gumede was talking about political will, and we know in our education system time and time again, when we need resources for more English teaching to make sure that our teachers speak better English, there's always money and political will there, but not for African languages. And this is because our beliefs about English versus African languages are deeply rooted in our colonial and apartheid past. So all the stakeholders in our education system, from the parents right through to the teachers, the learners, the policymakers, have deep-seated beliefs about the superiority of English as a vehicle for academic knowledge production. And so we can show as researchers time and time again why multilingual education is preferable, both for identity formation and for academic prowess. But unless we address the ideologies that we have about language, about English being superior and African languages being inferior, nothing will change. And unfortunately, the political elites that are often driving different programs have benefited from being enriched by English and having a lot of English. And so it's difficult to then look and see that, in fact, often they themselves were taught in places where teachers were able to code switch, or maybe did it in a hidden way, but it enabled them to get to where they are. So we know that as we work with teachers, in our research projects and in our teaching at universities, we come up against this ideology time and time again that we have about language and race, and that the languages that are associated with whiteness get more value. And I think this is where we must really take our hats off to the students in the Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall protests, because they highlighted this issue, that in fact it's not just language as a linguistic entity, but it is very racialized and it's very connected to our past and what was valued in the past.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Dr. Tyler, for also taking that. I think Professor Gumede, you were still, I think what you said was very profound. I wanted to follow that up, to make a follow-up on that one. How do we really make multilingualism a reality among, our learners? So you are coming up with a proposal that, maybe we missed the opportunity. We should have come up with a policy that requires that at least a learner must have his home language, mother tongue, but at least another additional language, which I think our education policy still revolve around that. There was also the African languages as an additional language. I think that was an act, which unfortunately could not be implemented. So we have this framework, we have these strategies that are on paper, but our problem is getting these strategies into practice, because that framework was there. It was even piloted in certain areas where, you know, African language were introduced as additional languages, and it was a requirement. But it just, for some strange reason, just fizzled out. It never really, but I think you are making a very important point. How do we make, and then I think Dr. Tyler has also made very critical point there of perceptions, attitude, parents, and so on and so on. So I think all these are realities that we maybe could be answering the question why there is a lag. We are not getting a take up. But I have a few questions here from the audience, which I think I really want to address. Precious Mohale said, how do we then avoid superiority of languages in education sector? And I think that's what Dr. Tyler said, that you know, English is also perceived as the superior language. And it's a language that it can, you know, create all kinds of things, provide jobs, cause rain to fall, all kinds of things that English are said to be. But I think the question is now, how do we deal with this kind of thing? How do we avoid, you know, I think our constitution was in favor of equity, language equity, equal enjoyment of all our languages. But in practice, you see that English is highly regarded. You know, even parents, they go for English. They will tell you, I want my child to be taught in English. So how do we avoid that? How do we deal with that? How do we change those attitudes?
Can I jump in here again?
Yeah.
Just to, I think that we have this tension in our politics because we have the right to choose the language of instruction and language issues in education has been firmly positioned with parents and with children. And there's a historical reason for this, and that is because we remember in 1976 when our children stood up against Afrikaans being enforced on them. And so in this country, we are very sensitive to having the government interfere in what languages can be used in schools because we've had that past. And so what we had with the South African Schools Act in 96 was that schools, through the governing bodies, which is majority led by parents, have the right to put in place the language policy of the school, which includes the medium of instruction as well as the language subjects which get taught at that school. And so we have this tension where we've given the power to parents, but in fact, often parents do not understand the full ramifications of what they choose. And undoubtedly, parents want their children to learn English, and that's very important. But understanding all the different modes of multilingual education isn't there. And so that's why we had the Bella Act coming into play now, because we've seen that handing over all the power to school governing bodies has not worked in terms of transformation. So schools have kept to English, and in particular our elite schools, because we mustn't forget them, they're a very important part of this picture, have not foregrounded African languages. And so what's happened there is that what is still seen as elite, the schools that are still seen to be achieving in the matric results, haven't included African languages, nowhere near to the level that they should have. And so the Bella Act has come in to say the government needs to have more of a role in school language policy because we're just not seeing the transformation that we need. And I think also the higher education sector has got a role to play. I know, Prof Madiba, this is where you work, and we need to see the universities requiring our first years to come in with an African language. You can be sure that our elite schools, our private schools, will start offering those isiXhosas, Sepedis at a higher level if they know that the students who leave to become doctors and lawyers and accountants and teachers need African languages to get into university. So I think that's a very practical step that we could take to ensure that that schools face a bit of pressure from universities to equip their children with African languages.
Professor Gumede, Bella Act, I think she just touched on it. I know. I think Dr. Tyler says that, okay, at least it provides a way to address, you know, decisions that are made by maybe school governing bodies. But what is your view? I mean, I know it's it's an act now, but there's still a lot of discussions around that. Is it going to promote mother tongue, or is it going to take mother tongue away? because I think that's where there is, maybe you can come in, Professor Gumede.
Let me just, I wanted to add to Dr. Taylor was saying just around bringing in language to higher education. So I think the way to change the culture, because, multilingualism, if we want to make it a reality, we have to change the country's culture to make it happen. And so how can one do it is, we can, for example, when you go to university, that it becomes compulsory to do a language, at least for the first year, to do an additional language, an African language. So it's all students who arrive there to do that. I mean, that's one other way in additional, because we want to change the whole country. We want to change the country's culture. Secondly, but we can do that the same in business. If you get a job, if you start as part of your orientation, we compel companies to to train or to teach staff, employees, an additional language. That's how we change the country culture. So it's not just, so obviously it's in the schooling system, we talked about it, but then we have to say all of the other aspects. The same in the sporting arenas. Now that's how we then, I think in one generation can change the culture. That's going to be very important. But I think one of the reasons why we haven't done, why we haven't focused on multilingualism is just that the education system post-1994 has failed. It's just as simple as that. I mean, the public education system. And because the public education system has been in such a crisis at the school level, it is schools have just been focusing on trying to do some of the basic stuff, because the system overall hasn't worked. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're having high unemployment, for example, why we're having the economic growth problem, low growth, is our education system is one of the structural issues that we've been unable to change, to make it relevant for the present, for our current economy and for the world economy, because we have to educate children not just for this economy, but we have to, we have to educate them for a broader world economy.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that. There are quite a few other questions that I need to run through so that we take this, clear this from. Yeah, so I think we have addressed that. Oh, there's another question here from Sylvester. No, I'm trying to see Robyn. Robyn Parker said, how can we encourage learners to take 2 home languages in schools, as universities do not reward a bonus mark for any more, so they take fun to boost their averages, as there is no incentive. So I think this one, I think you've touched it. I think Professor Gumede, in terms of higher education. I think higher education, what we are saying is that it's not just basic education. Higher education should also embrace multilingualism, should recognize that, should reward it, and so on. So I think there are various strategies that universities can do, like maybe what is being suggested here. So then Sylvester Mwepe said, how do we ensure that today's education system is not just superficially accommodating mother tongue, but is actively reviving and sustaining it, for instance, by embedding indigenous language across? I think that, again, maybe I don't want to someone, but I think like you are saying, I think what we are doing is more superficial. It's more superficial of embracing these languages. But how do we implement them in a way that really will be more meaningful? I mean, for example, you will see that our learners are struggling to read and write, literacy, for example. If you look at what is the core of that, you find that language proficiency is really the core, although they're not able to read even in their home language. But that means that they've not really acquired literacy skills, through any other language that they are strong in. So I think then it's a question appeal, I think, to the audience is saying, can we find a more practical way of making this not symbolic? Because I think as long as this thing remain on the paper, it's just symbolic. But more practical way that we need to do that. So
Prof, again, can I jump in there on that one? Yeah, thanks. Just to jump in on that one, thanks very much. So I think that it's really important for us to look beyond the education system to see what's happening in language and society as well. We have a rich, creative multilingualism in the country, and language learning is important, but our reality is that most South Africans, Black African language speaking South Africans, are very multilingual. And we can have a look just at our soapies and our TV shows, and we can find the most rich multilingual production of creativity in those spaces, and authors who are able to write multilingually, in particular for children. And if we're able to bring those creative people into the education system to start to inform what counts as good texts for children to read. Because yes, we do hear from the big international tests like Pearls that our children can't read. But in fact, what are we giving them to read? What books are in the classroom for young children to read? And if we have a look at how do people speak? How do people speak? I know that one of the comments was about Mengels and Kasital and all of these beautiful mixtures of languages. If children are given texts to read in those languages, which is much more familiar to them, that's how they speak at home, and they come to school and they see themselves in the text that they are reading, we'll find them getting more excited about texts. And so if we can just draw that connection between the multilingualism of our society, it goes beyond just that, it goes into jobs as well, and being able to value multilingualism as a skill in itself. So often you hear people being afraid of their job interview because they're going to have to perform in English. Well, what if we had multilingual job interviews, or if we required in our minimum requirements for a particular job that people could speak more than one language? Then the indigenous multilingualism of our population would become an economic resource in a much more practical way.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I think there are also quite a number of questions here that maybe I just want us to, maybe you can put them together. There are questions regarding the resources, resourcing the use of mother tongue, books, materials. I think just touched on that, Dr. Tyler. Now, how will we teach Xitsonga from grade 1 to grade 12 when there are no resources? There are no books for that and so on. So I think that's one aspect that we really need to, if we want to promote mother tongue in education, how do we really resource it? Are there enough resources in the country? Because that is the key question the big question that we have now.
Yes,
indeed. I think the resourcing of books, whatever, the resourcing in terms of materials, resourcing in terms of teachers. Do we have teachers that can be able to teach through mother tongue? Teaching maths, teaching science, do we have enough teachers that can do that? And then maybe later on we'll touch on the issue of technology, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, so let me just start with maybe on the resources side. So absolutely, there's a lot of natural resources in the form of our multilingual teachers that already exist. However, financial resources are very important. So it's very disappointing, for example, to see that this new program of mother tongue-based bilingual education, which is being rolled out in grade 4 from this year, is an unfunded mandate in the DBE. So we really do call for the fiscus to start to apply financial resourcing to MTBBE so that we can create resources. We know that we have a lot of glossaries that have been developed for subjects like maths and science in African languages. And this is all good and well, but we need materials that can be used by teachers as well that are curriculum aligned, so we can use the glossaries. I've worked recently on a project with high school teachers in maths and science, where they were able to work with glossaries and with Google Translate, and the children were translating in class and finding out the information for themselves, becoming independent learners through using these resources. But we do need bilingual materials that are curriculum aligned at the same time. And with our teachers, again, we know how innovative they are being in the classroom already without having any training in this, because there's very little teacher education at the moment in multilingual education, but they're doing it. They are translanguaging and code switching in the classroom. But the first thing we need to do is to lift the ban on code switching that teachers have come to believe, and that they've been told by officials, you mustn't code switch. only English because that's the only way. So if we start by just lifting that ban and saying to teachers, you are welcome to use all the languages, and here's some strategies, start to skill the teachers, in-service teachers as well as pre-service teachers who are training, give them the strategies, give them the skills, we can build on what is already there in our system.
Yeah. Okay, another question is to do with the urban multilingualism. In highly multilingual urban classrooms where a single mother tongue may not be shared by the majority, what practical models do we have there? I think this is a question that, for example, in say Nyanga, there's learners who want to do Sesotho as a mother tongue, but it's not available. Because I think that is the practical challenge that you find in urban areas. How do we cater for mother tongue in ways that, for example, Gauteng, I think Gauteng is a very complex area. So how do we implement mother tongue education there in such context?
I mean,
No, I think that's, yeah.
Okay, maybe Professor Gumede can go.
I mean, you know, there is a real practicalities, and all of the things we have to be pragmatic. I mean, that's very, very important. Yeah. When we come up with policies, when we implement, has to be pragmatic and imaginative. And perhaps, I mean, the best pragmatic way to do it is to say, well, actually, what's the strongest language in a region, in a province, in a town, and then that becomes then you know, the mother tongue or additional language. You know, this is practicality, because policies is also practical. I mean, the reason why some policies are unimplementable is because they're not practical and they're not pragmatic. So, you know, sometimes we want to get it right from an ideological point of view or from other point of view, but sometimes it is, when it's not practical and it's not pragmatic, you know, it's not possible. But what we need to do, really, the bigger thing is we need to revamp our education system, our schooling education system. I mean, we are, it's the reason why, one of the reasons why our economy is such a crisis is that multiple generations since 1994 has been in a schooling system, in at least the state schooling system, that has been irrelevant, really, for them as a learner, but also for the country and also for the world. And that's what we need to do. And then multilingualism must be part of that revamp, as we revamp and repivot the system. And I think it's going to be absolutely critical. I think there's going to be even less resources for multilingualism now, given that we're struggling, the economy is struggling. I cannot foresee practically that there's going to be more resources available. So what we then need to do is look at resources outside the state. For example, can we bring in the communities? I mean, with the multilingual societies, can the communities co-create with the schools? Can we bring in you know, community people to come and help? Can we bring in business? Can we bring in civil society? So rethinking schooling is not only, you know, even in mathematics and science education, bringing in the private sector, bringing in communities, bringing in people who are good in language, bringing them part of the schooling system. They may not be educators.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in on that with the multilingual classrooms? Just briefly, no, just to say that we, the practicality has been well documented in research. I mean, there are research studies in, for example, Belgium, where they have a high immigration into urban areas, and they might be 27 languages in one class. And you know, researchers are finding that teachers can do a lot in that context, getting children to work in groups with the common languages and share. Even when finally they get to be assessed, for example, in Dutch, there's a lot of work that can be done conceptually before that time in their different languages, as well as in places like Johannesburg. We have research studies that have shown that to be very effective in subjects like science, where children are grouped together in pairs or in groups, and they can work on their problems together, sharing a common language, and then report back to the class in English. And even some of the groups are mixed languages, because children in Soweto, they know their Zulu as well as their Sepedi, and they can understand, if they can't speak it, they'll understand what their friend has to to say. So we've got really good research backing to show that it works. And of course, what the thing to do is just to make sure which model are you going to apply. But at the end of the day, it has to be a multilingual model. Yeah.
So look, we will be drawing to a close. There are still a few questions here. There is a question that is on I think on maths. I think that one I've already mentioned it. We're not going to go into that. But I think there's a question on decolonization. What is our view? Do we think that mother tongue education, it's a way that can assist in bringing decolonization? But another one said no, but using mother tongue, then again, you are dividing people. We're going back to the dark days of apartheid. So I think there are two views, school of thought there. Bring mother tongue, yes, it decolonizes knowledge, decolonizes thinking, there are a whole lot of things, but others say, no, you are again taking us back to apartheid. You are dividing people. There's a question that is there. I think it's a bigger question, of course. Can't that lead to, again, vendor school? Can that lead to African school? Because I think that is where there is a problem, In as much as, there are learners, maybe in several good numbers that can use a particular language. Can you have a school that is of Africans only? Can you have a school that is only vendor again in these days? Or we have to find a way, like Dr. Tyler saying, that within the same school, we build in all the usages of these linguistic resources, but in the same facility, rather than having separate boats. So I don't know. You just want to comment on that, maybe Professor Gumede, from a broader perspective, political. You come from there.
I think, we have to think about decolonization a little bit more imaginatively than we've done before. I think that's the first thing, and for me, that's very, very important. So, we have to stay away from on the sloganeering or one truth as decolonization. In sloganeering, don't focus on just one truth. So, what is practical? What is pragmatic? What we can do. So I think even if we bring in a policy of it is compulsory to do an additional language, and in Africa, for me, that is decolonization in itself. Then there's also other parts of decolonization. For example, think about if we go to Singapore, it was also colonized by the British. And now, Singapore is one of the leading educators of mathematics. We now talk about Singapore mathematics. Now imagine, the British are learning Singapore mathematics. So that's decolonization also, and so on. So we have to reimagine policy in building a nation and building identity is not black and white. It is quite nuanced, and it needs to be innovative, and it can't, there's not one way is right and the other way is wrong. We have to navigate it in an imaginative way, but what we need to get out is, I think for me, very, very important, marginalized languages, very, very important, and finding ways to do that. Secondly, getting the content of education right, getting the reading right. We haven't talked about, for example, we're not reading. We're the least reading countries in the world. But if you look at the countries in the Second World War, after the Second World War, the developing countries that's done exceptionally well. Those are the countries that read very widely. So maybe we can start with a program of indigenous language reading, so African language reading, as one way to begin a process of changing the economy, for example.
Yeah. So maybe as we draw to a close, there's the Department of Basic Education now have initiated the mother tongue-based bilingual education. I think that's that they've launched. They're working. I think they're launching the strategy, mother tongue-based bilingual education strategy. So And I mean, it's very ambitious. Definitely they want to see the use of mother tongue across up to maybe grade 7 in the immediate future, and then that can be rolled out. So what is your view, Dr. Tyler, on that? I think you have read more on that strategy.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we're very excited about MTBBE. This is a groundbreaking program that we've been calling for since the days of Neville Alexander. In fact, Neville Alexander was the activist who called for MTBBE. And we've seen this, but as I say, we're concerned that it is unfunded. We're also concerned that last month, Minister Khwarube, in the announcement of the National Education and Training Council, did not list MTBBE as one of the priorities of that council to be looking into. And the way that this MTBBE cuts across maths and science, across languages, across so many features of our education system, it really should have been listed as a priority. But we know that teachers are already working. There are 187 schools in the Western Cape that are being supported by the WCED to roll this out. And we have early feedback, of course, by our research projects to show what are the advantages. And so we're very excited, and we know that it's going to need support, and it's going to need support from society, understanding what it means, and supporting with all the stakeholders.
Okay. So maybe I should give you the opportunity. There's someone here who asked a question as we close, just briefly. They say, Robyn and William, that is Tabang, what solution do you believe can be brought to bear in the short term? I know we discussed a lot about problems, challenges that are there. And of course, I've just mentioned this strategy but what is there any short term solution that you think from your side? Maybe if we do 1, 2, 3, I know Professor Gumede also makes a few suggestions, but maybe briefly, what strategy do you think we can put in forward so that we fully realize the potential of mother tongue based bilingual education, whichever way we call it?
For me, in the short term, what we need to do, a phase-in approach by saying an additional language to be learned by every learner. I think that would be it would be critical. I know, politicians talk about it, but I think that's as a first priority, very, very key, and then phase in mother tongue based language over a much longer term.
I think for me, I would say make African languages proficiency part of the entrance criteria for universities. And I would say get the message out to teachers and to anybody involved in children to read in your home language to children at home. Ask your bookstores, where are the African language books that we can use to read? Ask your libraries. Let's pay authors to write in African languages. Let the publishing industry come to the table. And those are two very small. And fund MTBBE, please.
Yeah. Okay. No. Thank you, colleagues, for all your inputs, and thanks to our audience, listeners, for posing these questions. I might have left 1 or 2 questions, but I think we are coming now to try to bring this to a close. I think, I sometimes ask myself a question. Some people say mother tongue-based bilingual, multilingual education is expensive. Then I ask myself a question, what is not expensive? If our learners are dropping out, from school in large numbers without having acquired skills, to me, that is very expensive. That is very, very expensive. If our universities are not doing well. They were spending billions, we're bleeding billions of students who some of them receive NSFAS, but they are not able to succeed. And I also ask my question, what makes a student who got a good symbol in metric and fail at university? Something is not right there. So I think as a country, we need to think now seriously about implementing mother tongue. As I said, only children of slaves are taught through the foreign language. We are not saying here when we say mother tongue, there's a difference between mother tongue only, but there's a difference between mother tongue based, multilingual education. So that education that is mother tongue based multilingual education, at the end, a learner, as Professor Gumede is saying, should be able to speak his or her own language, should be competent there, but at the same time should have acquired a knowledge of another additional language. And of course, English is not either or. It's not English or, but both of them are important, mother tongue and English. And the studies have been done in Nigeria and other countries where it was been clearly shown that where mother tongue has been used or mother tongue based bilingual education has been implemented, those learners also became very, very proficient, not only in the mother tongue, they also became proficient in English than those who went straight for English. Because unless learners coming from a particular class, but learners from the working class, it is very difficult for them to start schooling with already vocabulary level, proficiency level that is required to really to become successful in schools. So I don't think South Africa has got a choice in not adopting mother tongue. Otherwise, we'll continue bleeding. We'll continue bleeding our learners, as we have now. They'll be roaming the streets. And of course, one other thing that Professor Gumede has indicated, I think the issue of skill, it's not just getting certificate. It's a question of getting the 21st century critical skills, thinking, skills of critical thinking, innovation. How do you get innovation? You get innovation from all these kind of linguistic resources that we have. So those kind of skills, I think we would really need to promote them. And of course, we need to draw in technology. Technology now makes it easier to be able to facilitate the learning of the languages, the teaching of the languages, and so on and so on. So I think, as Dr. Tyler has indicated, I think we really commend the Department of Basic Education for, again, bringing back the mother tongue-based bilingual education, which, of course, for some reason just fell out of the way. But now we hope that with new energy, with a new effort, we will be able to implement that policy and, of course, promote the learning of other languages. I think that's what makes us, Ubuntu. We get Ubuntu from there. When I know your language, I know your soul. Then I respect you, and those kind of things. So I think today's discussion, as I said, it was just in honor of Justice Albie Sachs, and of course we give tribute, pay tribute to his large work, his advocacy on the issue of language and the rights. And I hope that we draw inspiration from this, and I'm sure we will be able to, yes, another 30 years, I think South Africa will be like Singapore. Now, thanks so much, Professor Gumede and Dr. Tyler for this discussion. And thank you very much to all the listeners out there, the audience, for your engagement. We really appreciate that. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye.